Hey Dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drawing. What we're going to do today is have a look at a simple technique to be able to make a card flip. If you want, follow along. The resources for this are available in the links below. Let's get started. I've got a standard Flutter install here, not done anything yet, and I'm just going to delete the entirety of the main app and we'll recreate it. Okay, so we have a stateless widget called my app, and that's going to return a material app. I'm going to, within the material app, set the debug show check banner to false, and I'm going to have a home which is going to be a scaffold. The body is going to have a safe area so that we stay away from our buttons and things, and then we're going to have a child which I'm just going to call flip. Doesn't exist yet, but it will. Okay, let's create that. So this is actually going to be a stateful widget. So we're going to create a stateful widget called flip, and with that everything should save and we should be ready to go. Now this build is going to need to return a bit of text, hello world. So with that in place, let's just check our app. It looks fine, we're ready to go. Okay, so we want to flip something. So in order to do that, I think we want something to actually flip. So I'm going to get rid of this text. We don't really need that. And I'm going to return a sized box of height, double infinity, width of double infinity, and child of a column. Okay, that's going to be the bulk of our app. Now, in our column, I am going to take a container, and in that container, I'm going to set the width to, let's start with 200, and the height to 200, and we'll have a color, which will be colors.red, and we have that up. Brilliant. I'm just going to move it down from the top a little bit. So above the container, I'm going to put a size box height. Let's put in 50 just to give us a bit of spacing at the top. Okay, now we're going to be rotating this box and flipping this box and doing things. So we really need some way of knowing which side is which. So I'm going to put in a child of text, with the text being top. That places some text there, but we want that to align, alignment, top, center. There we go. So when we flip it, rotate it, do things with it, we should be able to see what's going on. Okay, so let's work out how we're going to rotate it. And to rotate a container, or this container, or in fact rotate anything, we can use a widget called transform. And you might have just seen there that we have this thing called transform.rotate. Okay, got a red squiggly because this is requiring an angle. So let's put in an angle, and let's put in 45 degrees. So save that, and okay, that's rotated, but it hasn't quite rotated 45 degrees. There's something not quite right there. And that's because the angle is done in radians. Let's put 90 here. You see, that's definitely not right. So what is a radian? Well, I don't want to get into radians too much, but essentially it's based on pi. It's a measurement of angles. We can convert between degrees and radians. Essentially, a radian is based on pi. 2 times pi is a full circle. So let me put pi in from Dart Math. Now if I put that in by itself and save, you can see that has rotated 180 degrees. So pi is equivalent of 180 degrees. And you can see there, as I hover over it, that pi is just the number 3.14159, so on and so forth. So if we want to rotate by 90 degrees, we need to rotate by pi divided by 2. And that rotates that way. And if we want to rotate 45 degrees, it's pi divided by 4, and that gives us 45 degrees. And if we want to rotate all the way round, it's going to be pi multiplied by 2. And that's rotated all the way round, although you can't tell because we're back where we started. Okay, so that just gives you a rough idea of how that angle works. Let's put in underneath that a slider. Now a slider will create a slider for us, and it takes in a value, and we can change that value. Now because we have a stateful widget, we can set that value at the top, and we can set the value initially to be 0. Let's be explicit about it. This is a double. Okay, so double value equals 0, and that's in there. So what do we want to do when the value is changed? Well, when we change the slider, it will give us the value back, and we can do something with it. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the state and set the value of the, let's set this to changed value. We're going to set the value of our state to equal the changed value. Okay, so if we save that now, we can slide this, nothing happens. Well, just above the slider, let's put a text, and we'll just have here value to string, so we can see what that value is. So there we are, we've got 0, and as we slide it all the way up, we get 1. So that's what that slider is doing. So we know that a full rotation is pi times 2, and if we multiply that by the value, that will give us the rotation as a percentage of pi times 2. So when it's at 0, it's going to be 0, and when it's at 1, it's going to be pi times 2. So if we save that now and run our slider, we can see that we're able to rotate that, and when we're about 50%, we're upside down, and as we rotate further round, we get back to the top. Okay, so that's the rotation. The problem is we don't want it to rotate that way. We want it to rotate as in flipping. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a look at this rotate function. I'm going to do that by holding Control and clicking on it. And we can see here that the rotate function basically is a transform that sets the transform to a matrix 4 rotation on the Z angle. What does that mean? Well, let's come back to our rotation, and instead of doing the rotate here, I'll put in transform matrix 4, exactly as we've just seen, rotation on the Z, and the radians is this value that we've calculated. So let's put that in there and get rid of this. Now that should give us exactly the same effect, except now look where it's rotating from, the corner rather than the center. Well, we can fix that with a fractional offset from an alignment. So fractional offset center. Okay, and now we're back to where we were. But now we've got access. We don't have to just use rotation Z. we could use any of these other things that it can do. And we've got X, Y, and Z. So let's change rotation Z to rotation X and see what happens. Okay, now it's rotating around the center on the X-axis. Well, we want it to go on the Y-axis. And there we go. Now, we don't need this pi times 2 anymore because that's rotating twice and getting us back to where we want. So if we take the pi times 2 out and just do pi times value, that will allow us to flip from one side to the other. Excellent. Okay, so we've got that now, we've got that rotation working. But what we want to do is see the back of something else. How do we go about doing that? Well, there's a few ways of doing it, but the simplest way is just to have a second item. So let's take it, copy it, and paste it in. And now we have two transforms. But instead of transforming the second one, let's change the color of the second one to blue. Instead of rotating that around pi, what we want to do is we want to rotate this the opposite. So we have 1 minus the value. So when the value is at 0, this one is now 1. And when this value is at 1, it's at 0. And you can see now that the top is the other way round. And as we rotate, they flip. Now, when we get to halfway, you can't really see. If you manage to get it exactly to 50%, you wouldn't actually be able to see the line there. So what we can say within our code is if the value is less than 0.5, then show this transform, the first one, else show the second transform. Now, when we flip, it flips. And we can see the back and the front of our card. I say card, it's just a blue box. Let's make it a card. Let's come back to this transform, and I have some assets which I have included in the link below. And within the pubspec.yaml, the only thing I've changed here is to add the asset folder to the pubspec.yaml so we can use those images. So let's take this container, and instead of anything else, we'll put a decoration in, and this will be a box decoration. And the box decoration is going to have an image, and the image is going to be a decoration image. And that's going to take an image itself, and that's going to be an asset image, and it's going to be from our assets, and we're going to have card back.png. Okay, save that, put some commas in. We're going to get an error because we can't have a color with a box decoration. And I'm also going to change the size here to be more appropriate for the size of our card, 466. So if I save that, I've now got a card. And when we flip it, we've got a blue box. Okay, now that's easily rectified by taking our transform and replacing the transform below, just changing our value to the 1 minus the value, and changing the asset to card front in a bracket. Given that, we should now be able to flip our card. Okay. At this point, we can get rid of the text that says top. I'm going to do that from both the containers. And that's it, really. Except now I want to be able to animate this. I want to be able to click a button for it to flip. I don't want to have to run a slider. So to do that, we're going to have to animate. Let's come back to the top. And to animate, we're going to need an animation controller. So let's say this is going to be a late final animation controller, which we will call animation controller. Okay, we're going to need an init state now, and we're going to need to set up this animation controller. And the animation controller is going to equal an animation controller, and that needs something called a vsync. It needs basically a ticker, something that it can count on, and we can convert our state to that by putting with single ticker provider state mixing, and then we can say that the vsync is going to be this. Okay. We also need to know how long our animation is going to last, so we can do that with a duration, and we can set the duration to whatever we want. Let's do seconds 2 for now. That's a long time, but we will reduce that later on. Okay, now we've got that, we can change our value to equal whatever the animation is. We can do that by setting the animation controller dot add listener, and that's going to change every time it ticks. It's going to change, and we can say here that the value is going to equal, or in fact we need to do our set state again, and we say that our value is going to equal our animation controller dot value. Okay, so every time when the animation is running, every frame if you like, it's going to set the state and give the value. Now we'll leave the text in to see what that value is, but we'll get rid of the slider now. We don't need that. Instead we'll put an elevated button on pressed do something, and the child can just be a text which says flip. Okay, some commas in. So what do we want to do when we press it? Well, we want to say animation controller forward. So that's basically the equivalent of saying play for the animation. So if we save that now, and we will do a hot restart there to make sure the animation controller is loaded, you can watch the value, and when we click flip, over 2 seconds our card flips. Perfect. But what happens when we flip again? Nothing. Okay, so now we want our animation controller to go backwards. So within our button here, we can say if animation controller is completed, okay, then animation controller reverse. Else animation controller forward. So completed is when the animation has stopped at the end. Well, that's where we are now. So if we click flip now, it should go back. And we can flip between the two. But what happens if we flip while it is animating? So click, click. Nothing. Doesn't do anything. So what we can also say here is or animation controller status equals animation status, dot forward. So what we're saying is if it is completed or it's in the forward motion, we'll reverse. Otherwise, we will go forward. So saving that. Now when we flip, we can stop it really at any point and flip it backwards and forwards. Wonderful. Finally, I want to make this a little bit faster. So let's make this, milliseconds. Let's make it 500, which is half a second. Okay, and we'll need to do a hot restart there. We'll do a flip, and it flips. Fab. Now, the problem with that is it's not very smooth. I would like to add in the ability to have some curves to make it a little bit smoother. And we can do that by creating another variable, which is a type of animation. I'm going to call this one rotation. Okay, so in our init state, I'm going to set up in here that our rotation is going to equal a tween double number. It's going to begin at 0 and it's going to end at 1. And the animation controller is going to be the animation controller. Okay, now with that in place, we can get rid of this value here because we don't want that to update anymore. We don't need that to update. In fact, we're not going to need the value anymore. But when we come through, we need to change all the values to the rotation dot value, because this rotation dot value is, this animation is going to give us a value between 0 and 1 based on when the animation controller is. So let's just put that in a couple of places that we have rotation, or a couple of places we have value, including the text just for now so we can still see the number. We'll need to do a hard restart there. And when we flip, nothing's changed. Okay, that's because the animation controller itself has a value which we were setting previously in set state that goes between 0 and 1. And now we've created a rotation that also goes between 0 and 1. Well, that's not really doing anything new for us. However, what we can do is, instead of animating just the controller, we can put in here a curved animation. Now the parent for that, let's just get this on the right lines. So the parent for that is going to be the animation controller, and the curve can be a number of curves. There are quite a lot of them to choose from. But you can do things such as bouncing in and out and curves, easing in and out, all sorts of stuff. I'm just going to go to ease in out quart, which is one I quite like for this. So now when we save that, the numbers aren't going to change just between 0 and 1 in a log. It's going to go in a graph, and you can look at the graph at this link if you want to see what that looks like. Let's do a refresh and do a flip. Okay, and that's flipping. And I just realized an error I've made is we've got the card back showing twice. That's because I've not changed the value here. Here we go, rotation dot value. Okay, now we're flipping properly, and you can see that there's a much smoother curve to that. Right, and that's it. There's our flip. Our animation is done. What can you do with this? whatever you want. You could make a very simple game. Why don't we do that now? Let's take our onPressed and we can say, in fact, let's come up to the top first of all and say in our we're going to have a string card equals assets card front.png. Yep. And then back in our button here onPressed, we're going to say if animation controller status equals animation controller status dismissed. Okay, so the only time this is true is when the card is face down and it's at the beginning of the animation. Then we're going to get a random number. In fact, we're not going to get a random, we're going to get a random boolean. In this case, we're going to say next bool, which is going to give us a true or false. If it's true, set state to the card equal assets card front.png, else we will set the state to be card front 2. So basically, when we click the button, if it's face down, it's going to choose which of these two cards it's going to show. Okay, so instead of the asset front here, we're going to show the card. And that can't be a constant anymore. Right, let's save that, give it a restart, and flip it. We've got the clubs. Now we've got a heart. So randomly, we're going to get one or the other of those, and that's a start to some sort of game. That's it. That is a simple getting your flip on. Folks, if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out, and we'll see you next time. Till then, take care. Bye now.